Ladies and gentlemen, my fellow Americans, welcome to The Means with Dan Vrabel, your very own unscripted weekly podcast of the people, by the people, for the people, and your source for unbiased, organic news. I'm your host, Dan Vrabel. I'd like to thank you all for joining us on this second official weekly episode to address the news and to fundamentally deepen our understanding on the issues of the day. This week we've had quite the eventful one, and without further ado, let us get into it, as we have many matters to address, issues to resolve, and inquiries to explore. Thank you. Now that we've got that out of the way, perhaps most notably this week, we have seen the Ukraine American mineral deal finally get passed. After months of fruitless discourse and rather conflicting and controversial media cycles, in which Donald Trump, President of this United States, served not to aid our Western allies and honored a fundamental American duty, but rather to take a step back on the world stage, to aid and abet tyranny, and to appease the aggressive, undemocratic Russian state, headed by infamous despot Vladimir Putin. We have seen this deal passed amidst months of conflict between Trump and the defiant, yet widely acclaimed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who has repeatedly made it clear that he will not bow down to this unwarranted Russian aggression and will stand as the first line of defense for not only Europe but the wider Western world amidst this unprecedented series of conflicts. Now, although this deal comes after months of weakness and hesitancy from the Trump administration, let us take this hopefully as a sign that there will be greater collaboration between our two nations, America and Ukraine, against the fundamental threat and the un American, tyrannical force that is the Russian state at present. However, although this deal was passed, it was admittedly far from Trump's initial goal of half a trillion in minerals of the Ukrainians to us. No, this deal actually has not only no security guarantee, which is what Trump admittedly promised, but it has no pre existing profit guarantee for the American people and the American state. No, this deal only guaranteed an American stake in future investments and discoveries, while all current reserves are left untouched. Meanwhile, we have also received less than demanded in raw resources, and we have given far less than we had previously obliged ourselves to do. Frankly, I find this a disgraceful act of weakness by the Trump administration. No, we have seen the breakdown of the Western Republican order that has served to defend the noble ideas of tradition, duty, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, all of which have once been cornerstones of the great American state, but have now been attacked by an administration that would rather kowtow and cozy up to despots and dictators than stand by our fellow noble republics. Frankly, I think it's a shame. We have managed to, in the matter of weeks, eradicate the Western democratic order, that empire of liberty that we had spent centuries trying to uphold and construct and decades masterfully maintaining. This deal, although it is a step in the right direction, ultimately will require far greater support and fundamental reliability from the American nation state. And, at least in my opinion, is far too soft on Russia, for it offers no moratorium upon the Russians if they continue to advance their offensive, nor does it give us a single iota of security between ourselves and the Ukrainians. We have not given them a guarantee that we will continue military aid, even though that is what the mineral deal originally was. You give us the minerals, we give you the guarantee of continued security aid. No, this deal has not been that. This deal has, on the contrary, been no guarantee of minerals for us at present, and no guarantee of security. It has been a lose lose for both parties involved, and the only individual winning from this corrupt bargain has been Vladimir Putin. Frankly, I think this unbridled assault upon the Western civilization is a grand tragedy. And although this is a step in the right direction, I cannot help but remain a skeptic in the coming months as Trump's administration continues to vacillate and double guess itself. In other news, we have seen the weakness of the Trump administration continue as China has stated that they are evaluating our trade offer and have not only refuted claims that we have been in negotiations, but have stated that they will not necessarily enter negotiations to remove the tariffs and restore regular trade relations. Now, I've made myself clear before. I fundamentally support clamping down on Chinese monopoly on exports. And I have supported the effort of certain tariffs solely on China while still consolidating the support of our allies. But we have not done that. We have merely made an uncalculated move that has served to destroy our credibility, eradicate a fifth of our national wealth, and aid the fundamental credibility and international standing of the Chinese state, which frankly is a tragedy. You know, there was a time not too long ago when the American nation state was looked at as the world's foremost republic, as the defender of the noble ideas of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, this empire of liberty. But we have managed to erode that. We have managed to allow China, a communistic, authoritarian regime that not only imprisons millions of its own people without cause, not only does it rapidly turn into a surveillance state which monitors its civilians' every move, not only has it ran an aggressive militarist policy that has stood directly in the face of noble republicanism, not only has it stood in the face of American jobs, but it has served directly against everything and every virtue that the Republican order ought to stand for. And yet they have somehow managed to turn out as the good guys on the international stage on account of our gross inability to manage ourselves, on our gross inability to rally the West behind us. Frankly, we would never have expected even the most conservative Republican to have stood by such isolationist actions, that we would have expected more from Dennis Kucinich, the erstwhile Democratic isolationist congressman from Ohio, than from a Republican president 10, 20, 30 years ago. It's unbelievable, and frankly, it's a shame. The fact is, we do need to cramp down on China. We do need to put the heat on them to secure not only the prosperity and success of American jobs and of American economic growth, but to eradicate their monopoly on exports and to eradicate the growing strength and power that BRICS, the alliance between Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, as an economic alternative to the West, has become. For we have seen this alliance, this unholy bond between not only the bulwarks of tyranny, communist China, militarist Russia, and Islamist Iran, but we have seen them ally with many nations that would fundamentally otherwise be a part of the Republican bloc. No, we have seen this alternative to American leadership emerge not out of wider disdain for our nation and what we do, but out of a wider lack of trust that the global community has for our administration, for our national credibility that has eroded on account of this administration. It's a tragedy, it really is. You know, we have seen the United States dollar be abandoned as the world's reserve currency by over 70 countries in the last couple years on account of our own unreliability. You know, preserving the dollar as the world's reserve currency was fundamentally a cornerstone of American success and leadership on the world stage. Keeping the dollar as the world's reserve currency not only benefited individual monetary establishments, banks, trade offers, etc., but it served to enhance American credibility as well. And frankly, to erode such a thing and to replace it with not only various unreliable and untested metrics, such as open exchange of alternative currencies, but of alternatives such as gold rather than the dollar as the fundamental reserve, they're unstable. The dollar, managed by a sound American government, was what fundamentally allowed for transactions to be smooth, sound, and reliable, and the eradication thereof has served not only to impact negatively our own national credibility, but it has detrimented our business. For America's business is business. But without the strength of the US dollar and without its respect on the world stage, we cannot have the prosperity that we so deserve. Frankly, this misstep serves not only to detriment the American nation state, but the wider stability of the world's market. And any rational follower of economic prosperity cannot stand by and watch as this happens. So I call not only upon the Trump administration to pursue more rational economic policy without being rash, making one decision one day, another the next, and going back to the first decision on the third day because they felt like it for fun. No, I call on rational decision making being made abiding by the rules of logic. For logic is and ought to be the cornerstone of any and all governments, not fanaticism, not impulse. In addition to de-dollarization, which has emerged as a side effect of American weakness on the world stage, we have seen prices continue to rise in American goods on the American market. We have seen, as a result of these tariffs, not only a rise in the costs of everyday goods, whether it be eggs, potatoes, or electronics, but we have seen a rise in the cost of crucial medications that fundamentally keep Americans moving. We have seen not only is the everyday American struggling to make ends meet, but they're struggling to make something out of that. The everyday American is having a harder and harder time getting what they need to get. Not only are prices higher, the shelves are ran thinner. And the fact of the matter is, when we are in such a crisis in which we are facing potential possibilities of supermarkets being empty, we are facing the possibility of shelves being left without products. We must put aside ideological goals and instead honor the pragmatic duty to our people to do what best befits the circumstance. For when push comes to shove, it must be rational policy that guides our trade position. Having said that, I have made it clear I do not oppose tariffs. I fundamentally support the overall drive to restore jobs on these noble shores and to fundamentally restore our place as a production and manufacturing power. But this is not the way to go about doing it. No, this has only served to alienate our allies, empty our shelves, and make us look like a fool. No, frankly, it's a tragedy. We have seen the lack of any ability to produce goods while costs have rose. The fact is, tariffs, if they are balanced with the growth of American industry, are beneficial. If there is the rational alternative of growing American domestic industry, tariffs costs can be offset by their benefits. If there is that growth, that is. If we do not have the growth in industry to offset the rise in costs, all tariffs are an extra tax on the American consumer. There has to be that benefit felt by the American worker to make it worthwhile. For if we did have that benefit, there would be a simple solution to the crowd that derides the administration for rising costs. Buy American goods. It's that simple. But we don't have that solution. No, American growth domestically has been down over the last 3 months, which has prevented the ability to offset that rise in prices. For without the growth of the American worker, tariffs lack benefit. They lack reason. So I call upon rational tariffs, not like some on the Democratic Party have said of no tariffs whatsoever and unrestricted free trade, which serves to detriment the American worker by flooding the market with cheap goods. Nor am I advocating, like the Republicans are, for excessive tariffs, which serve to detriment the American consumer by forcing them to buy goods at an excess price, hurting their wallet and hurting their ability to make ends meet. No, I simply propose a rational alternative fair trade. Not free trade, not protectionism, a fair, square deal for every American, where the American worker, businessman, and consumer alike are all given a leg up by selective tariffs on certain industries. In other news, we have seen as Musk is officially leaving the American government following his 4-month stint as de facto head of Doge and the proverbial puppet master of this administration, we have seen Trump not only mock Musk, which I must admit has been fairly amusing, but we have seen the wider ramifications of Doge unfold. For the Department of Government Efficiency, although a noble goal at first to curb excess waste and to fundamentally ensure that the everyday American's taxpayer dollar does not go to waste, has fundamentally looked more like the Department of Graft and Excess than the Department of Government Efficiency. Frankly, it's a gross mismanagement of government time, resources, and power to allocate resources as we have been. We have seen Doge not only claim to have saved far more than they actually did, but we have seen the only actual long lasting consequence of Musk's endeavor in the American government having been the mass disappearance of Medicaid funds, the uncertainty to where billions of Americans' dollars have went, and we have seen a man without any congressional or judicial approval gain access to the American people's most sensitive information. For the fact is, I do not think it was what the American people voted for when they voted for Trump back in November. They voted for an end to rising costs, an end to the out of date, out of place culture war politics and identity politics of the Democratic Party, and they voted in opposition to what they perceived to be their abandonment by the elites. No, they did not vote for an aristocratic foreign monopolizer, Elon Musk, who has made his money, although admirably. But the fact of the matter is, no matter how much money you make, the American government and the American people are not for sale. We have seen Elon Musk mechanize the government not only for his own gain, to subsidize his own projects, whether it be Starlink or otherwise unbacked industries that have now received the full backing of the American government in a corrupt alliance between unholy politics and unholy business. But we have seen the corruption of Doge be unbounded, as we saw tens of thousands of federal workers let go without probable reason or cause, let go without benefits, and left in the dust. We have seen the fundamental tragedy that is hundreds of millions of American Medicaid dollars go without a trace. We have seen a man without any congressional approval necessary to form a department, nor any judicial approval to gain access to our most sensitive information, gain access to the deepest labyrinths and corridors of the American government. We have seen this outsider infiltrate the halls of state, ransack it for his own gain, and then leave without a trace. Frankly, this tragedy is a corrupt bargain. We have seen Elon Musk break constitutional procedures with the full approval of Donald Trump, and we have seen this corruption go unpunished. For the American people and their skepticism of government has not been without reason. Over the last 50 years, we have seen scandal after scandal, corrupt administration after corrupt administration. It only makes sense that the American people would be skeptical of a government after tragedy like that. We have seen the scandals of Watergate with Nixon, the Nixon pardon with Ford, the Iran hostage mismanaging with Carter, and the pardoning of his own brother. We saw the Iran-Contra crisis with Reagan. We saw the scandals of NAFTA and the outsourcing of American jobs unfold over decades following Bush and Clinton's presidencies. We saw the controversies of the Iraq War and of managing the war on terror with Bush. an administration that I had, at least without hindsight, would have had absolute support for. And we saw the fundamental corruption within Biden's administration. We saw a man pardon his entire family without cause and exonerate them from any possible investigation. No innocent man does such a thing. But all of this corruption, all of this wrongdoing by administrations left and right, has been dwarfed by the actions of the Trump administration in these only 100 days since he took office. For this is not only worse than his great corruption in his first term, but this has rivaled anything and every action that we have seen since the days of Tammany Hall back in the old United States. We have not seen corruption on this scale in living memory, for we have seen not only millions of American dollars go without a trace, but we have seen it go unpunished and not even looked into. For I am not here to propound a conspiracy theory. I am not here to accuse anybody of anything that they have not been proven to do, whether that's Elon Musk or Donald Trump. But the fact of the matter is, when hundreds of millions of American dollars go without a trace, and when a man outside of government is given full access to sensitive information without the proper approval, it is only rational to open an investigation on the matter. Now, I am not a fool. I know Congress will not open an investigation with their current majorities. They have been heavily put and safely put in the pockets of Elon Musk and his friends. But the fact of the matter is, an investigation ought to be opened on not only Elon Musk's own conduct in the Doge endeavor, but in the eventual whereabouts of the Medicaid dollars and in the wider whereabouts of sensitive information of the American worker and the American people that has been held by the government and given to Elon Musk. Lastly, I think we ought to have an investigation opened on Musk for the grave error of firing American workers without just cause, and for the access he has had to the taxpayer dollar without proper judicial approval, without congressional approval, and without a trace of where these dollars went. Frankly, this act of corruption is something that would be better befit in a tin pot republic than in the cornerstone of Western civilization. And such behavior must not be tolerated in a land with which we pride ourselves for our integrity. For I declare corruption cannot stand if we do claim ourselves to be world leaders, which I think we ought to be. Beyond this, we have seen as the economy has gone downhill and as threats of a recession and wider economic downturn has emerged, as we have seen nearly 10% declines in the raw S&P 500 values, in reliability of growth, and we have seen nearly a fifth of our nation's total wealth go away, gone with the wind in a matter of a couple weeks. We have simultaneously seen Donald Trump and his own family enrich themselves in what has been a corrupt backroom bargain. We have seen Trump utilize government resources and policy to lax restrictions on the cryptocurrency industry, which has served not only to undermine the stability of the American dollar, but open the door to dangerous scam coins that are not regulated by government industries, are not tethered to any government reserves, and are not tethered by the rules of logic. These scam coins come out of nowhere and leave millions of good, honest people without protection and without their life savings. We saw Trump coin, the coin he opened himself, as what can safely be called a scam coin, have millions of people put nearly all their money into a coin that then crashed. We saw all of this investment by people who have nothing else to give, people who have given their full, undying faith to Donald J. Trump, and then we see their money go with the wind, without a trace. This corruption cannot stand. This immoral practice cannot stand, where we have the president literally steal from the American people, where we have the man in charge of our government's fiscal policy alter the policy to benefit his current business endeavors. That is an unholy bond between corrupt government and corrupt industry when we see the President of the United States alter the fiscal economic course of the nation to help benefit his portfolio at the same time. For although he was not a great president, Jimmy Carter, when he was elected, sold off his peanut farm when he took office to ensure there would be no corruption nor any ties to special interests. So did Teddy Roosevelt remove any ties to his business when he took office so he could pursue the avenue of consumer protections. We must have this same nobility, this same sense of overarching duty within the halls of our government. Not a man who manipulates government policy, which ought to be done with hesitancy, solely to benefit his own bank account. We have seen simultaneously billions of shady dollars be put into these cryptocurrencies that have went directly to the portfolio of Donald Trump, which has, while the American people's bank accounts have been in decline, his have only skyrocketed. In this corrupt bargain that I cannot help but pontificate to be a backroom deal between Trump and the titans of tech, who have proudly backed him since his election and have openly embraced this man in his warm welcome to monopolies and to tyranny. For I cannot help but feel a great sense of rage when I see a man who has served as the voice of the forgotten man to make America great again only served to steal from those who believed in him most, only served to commit the same act of corruption that he said he would drain from the swamp but months prior. Beyond this act of digital-based corruption in unreliable cryptocurrency aided by the titans of tech, we have seen Donald Trump Jr. found an elite private club within Washington, D.C., entitled the Executive Branch, where, upon a $500,000 entry fee, members of the higher rungs of government, politics, lobbying groups, and corporate special interests can gain entry to a club with which special deals can be negotiated and backroom promises made. For this, frankly, as a student of history, strikes me as eerily similar to the actions of the Gilded Age, for the actions of the Democrat-owned Tammany Hall of the 19th century, with which elite members of business and government would collude in a dark cabal to orchestrate and receive government contracts, deals, and resources only to enrich their own personal pockets. We have seen this exclusive club not only as the first of its kind, but as one of many emerging clubs of lobbyist groups and of the unholy alliance between corrupt government and corrupt special interests that has served not to help the free market and free business, but has served to be more befitting of crony capitalism than of a noble, all-American free market. For the American people's business is business, not backroom deals. We settle our quarrels with the free market, not through smoke and mirrors. Frankly, this action strikes me less as what we would see in the noble American marketplace and more what we would see within the corrupt Russian state, where oligarchs are handed out business contracts like it's going out of style. We have seen this new club emerge, which has been not only a money grab for the Trump family, but has been a decidedly corrupt, exclusive, and frankly, an elitist venture by the Trumps. We have seen this endeavor serve not only to undercut their populist bona fides, but further cement an elite special group within Washington. For the family that has spoken about draining the swamp, they have constructed quite the sifter to keep all the mud and guck inside. We have seen this elite club serve only to tighten the bond between special interests and Washington politicians. And frankly, it makes me sick. In other Better news, we have seen a recent act proposed in Congress entitled the Pelosi Act, also known as the Preventing Elected Legislatures from Owning Stocks and Investments Act, presented by Republican legislators to prevent members of Congress from owning or purchasing stocks in the markets, so as to prevent corrupt deals and insider trading between members of Congress and lobbying groups, so as to secure if you vote a certain way, you get a benefit in the stock market. In other words, it's taking the incentive out of corruption. And frankly, although this bill is unlikely to pass on account of the immense disfavor it shall meet amongst big corporate interests and lobbying groups, I cannot help but embrace this push from the right for rational measures against corruption. For if we allow members of Congress and government to trade stocks while in office, we have a conflict of interest that we have seen unfold with our president. This conflict of interest, in which they put the interests of their own bank accounts over the interests of the masses, must not be allowed to persist and must be met with the full, undivided attention of the American people and a resolute crusade against corruption from the top, highest rungs of federal government all the way down through every single iota of the state. So I resolutely support this act to combat the fundamental corruption that has persisted within the halls of American Congress and has dictated the actions of the state. For I think such an act will not only benefit the American people's overall well-being, but it will reduce and clamp down on corruption as a whole. For those who have criticized the act purely upon its name, being named after Democratic Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi, I would like to state that although she may have provided contributions in the past, her lasting legacy is and fundamentally shall be the fact that she was able to make nearly $250 million while in Congress on a salary that can barely pay rent. Now, not only is this mathematically a great leap in logic, but it can be explained by her immense, almost unexplainable prowess in the stock market. Have not only been able to trade exactly according to every single bill with a near immaculate guessing ability, but they managed to accumulate one of the largest net worths of any congressperson, of any member of government, through government office. And frankly, this measure of objective corruption is something that ought to be combated. Although I did support the overall push that she had towards certain beneficial policies, her corruption instantly eradicates any and all benefits she may have presented. For that reason, I can remember supporting Ohio Congressman Tim Ryan, the Democrat who challenged Pelosi to her leadership back in 2019, but unfortunately failed due to his unpopularity with special interest groups. I can remember every time the Democrats would regain the House from 2006 to 2020, we saw Pelosi remain the House Speaker, the leader of the Democratic Party in the House. And frankly, I think this was a grave mistake. For a party which could have been branded as the popular anti-corruption vehicle of the masses, has now gotten themselves associated with an individual who has become the textbook definition of insider trading within Congress. So, if I had to say anything to Democrats who may be a skeptic of such a law due to its eponym, I would say do not oppose a law because of its name, oppose it because of its contents. And frankly, the proposed Pelosi Act would serve only to benefit the American people and the sanctity of our government. For the American business is business, but the business of the American Congress is to legislate, not to enrich themselves. Unfortunately, however, although Republican senators like Josh Hawley have championed this bill and measures against corruption, to which I give them my sincere praise, we have seen no such voice from the Republican Party on limiting the power of insider trading by the executive. The executive branch has received almost no investigation nor calls for regulation on their actions. For if we allow these big government leaders to do whatever they want with the markets, to enrich themselves and not the American people, this is not an honest, honorable market. This is crony capitalism at its finest, which is anything but capitalistic. And frankly, is a grave disgrace and an affront to everything that our republic stands for. Hence, I cannot in good conscience find such a bill reasonable, while at the same time not bringing up the same scrutiny to the executive branch of the American government. In addition, we have seen a rather noble act finally implemented by the American government. We have seen the United States Congress pass a ban on deepfake AI generated pornography, which has been signed into law by President Donald J. Trump. And frankly, I support this effort. I think AI generated pornography, especially fakes of real people, are not only incredibly detrimental to American culture, traditions, and standards, but are detrimental to the wider quality of Western civilization as a whole, and serve only to degrade the overall quality of our society, and must be met with resolute and firm opposition. So I celebrate the passing of this bill as a noble occasion for our state. Yet, I cannot help but look at our government and see we have passed now 3 bills into law in this Congress after 4 months. Frankly, this is a disgrace in its entirety. 3 laws. Let that sink in. 3 laws have been passed in the last 4 months, which has been the lowest number of laws passed by Congress within their first 100 days in American history. We saw in Franklin Roosevelt's first Congress in 1933 over 700 bills passed into law, namely establishment of Social Security, public works programs, conventions of industry and labor, and fundamental consumer protections and regulations that helped the American worker and lifted our country out of the Depression, passed with collaboration from both the left and the right, within the span of about 100 days, to benefit the American people. We saw several hundred bills passed within every Congress of Dwight D. Eisenhower within their first 100 days, bills that would eventually serve not only to check the power on corrupt big special interests, whether it be unions, corporations, or other, but establish our national highway system within the first 100 days. We saw the first ever Congress of the United States pass nearly 100 bills back in their first 100 days when they had to travel on horseback. We saw the Congress of the Reconstruction in the 1860s pass almost 1,000 bills in their first 100 days to help restore order and prosperity to the Union following our victory in the Civil War. We even saw the gridlocked Congresses of the 1990s pass dozens and dozens of bills in their first 100 days purely as a matter of due procedure. And yet, we have passed less and less bills as a nation into law every year that goes by. Our government has gotten less and less efficient as more and more congressmen, more and more politicians treat the halls of government as a stage for dance than a hall for action. We have seen politicians obstruct the overall resolve of the American people and bring our government's action to a halt. In the last Congress, we barely even passed 36 laws over the span of 2 years, only 5 within the first 100 days. In this Congress, we passed only 3 laws. The fact is, the Congress of the Confederation in the 1780s, the failed system of government which ultimately was unable to secure even the most basic resolutions for the American masses, passed more laws than the government we have now in the year 2025. This gross efficiency has served not only to detriment the American people, but to detriment even these politicians who keep it perpetuating. For the concern of every politician is re-election, as tragic as it may be. So here's my message to all crooked politicians. Your efforts towards re-election will be made far easier if you pass laws than if you don't. For the American people, whether they agree or disagree with your personal political convictions, will be far happier if you pass literally anything than if you sit around and do nothing in Washington for the next 2 years before you kowtow to a couple special interest groups every November. That is not the way to run a country. Least of all, is it the way to run the world's foremost republic. And frankly, the American people cannot, will not, and ought not to stand for such inefficiency within our government. For the business of the American people may be business, but we cannot have business if we do not have action in our halls of government. Furthermore, we have seen the trial of Mark Zuckerberg and his corporation Meta begin for violating U.S. antitrust law in their purchase of Instagram and WhatsApp, which, in addition to Facebook, now called Meta, does fundamentally constitute a monopoly under various regulatory acts, including the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, which gave the federal government the power to crack down upon un-American monopolies, which impede a free and fair market. And frankly, I fully endorse and praise the efforts of the FTC to crack down upon unfair, un-American, and unfree business practices. For we cannot have a free or fair market if we have these cronyism and these monopolies permeate everyday life. That is not a free market. That is not the natural flow of opportunity if we have one man control the sale of all goods. For all that does is give him the sole power to be a law unto himself, to be a government, a regulator, a leader unto himself where he has been given no such authority. For the leaders of the market ought to be the masses, not one man. However, in the midst of this trial impending, we have not only seen Donald Trump, previously an ardent critic of Mr. Zuckerberg, give favorable treatment to him, but we have seen the GOP push a motion to strip the Federal Trade Commission of its antitrust powers, which would not only make all antitrust regulation effectively unenforceable by the Federal Trade Commission, but it would leave the federal government's sole ability to regulate monopolies being within the federal presidency. And the fact of the matter is, Trump has proven himself to be a friend of monopolies, not of the market. And thus, such an act must be opposed as an attack upon American ingenuity and the American market as a whole. For if we do not have common sense regulations and limits upon monopolies, ergo antitrust, we cannot have a free and fair market, and we cannot have prosperity for the everyday American. In foreign news, we have seen the Pakistan-India conflict that had been discussed last week escalate, as the apparent cause of the attack last week had been that of an Islamic terrorist group associated with the Taliban, who attacked Indian-occupied regions of Jammu and Kashmir to the mass anger of the world. We have seen India issue an ultimatum towards Pakistan to allow them to not only weed out every last one of these terrorists, but to turn over any terrorists within the state of Pakistan. And we have seen Pakistan not only deny any potential collusion with terrorist groups, but we've seen them refuse to honor the ultimatum. And in response, we have seen the People's Republic of China back Pakistan against India, which has been a longtime rival. Here, we have also seen Pakistan claim that there are impending military strikes from the Indian nation state, which will serve only to escalate what could potentially be the largest conflict in decades. Fundamentally, I see an honorable opening for the American state to redeem themselves and to back the eradication of fundamentalist terror groups the world over. We have an opportunity here to back not only the Indian Republic, but to back any and all efforts combating terrorism that has been needlessly harbored, needlessly tolerated, and now needlessly endorsed by the Chinese state. And frankly, I call upon all peoples of the world and all noble republics to be steadfast in combating terrorism, Islamic fundamentalism, and any militant radicalism that still permeates this very earth. For we cannot have a noble republic and we cannot have a truly free world until we fully and completely eradicate terrorism altogether. For it is our American duty to do so. In final news, the resolute victory of liberalism in two major foreign elections throughout the English speaking world. We have seen the landslide victory of Liberal Mark Carney in Canada's election Monday, which saw not only a resolute victory for the Liberal Party, not only their largest percentage of the vote in nearly 30 years, but we saw the leader of the Conservative Party, Pierre Poilievre, go in a couple of months from being expected to win a landslide victory to losing his own seat in Parliament. With the Conservatives of Canada in disarray after 4 consecutive election losses, Pierre Poilievre, the now grossly unsuccessful leader of the Conservative Party, has refused to step down, even though he lost his own seat in Parliament. To which I say, if you care about your party and your movement, when you screw the pooch, you ought to get off the pot. I said this about Kamala Harris with the Democrats, and I'll say it about Pierre Poilievre with the Conservatives. If you lose the election for your party, as much as I hate to say it because I know how much these people want it, you're done. You had your chance and you blew it. Now, I would, if I were asked to endorse a candidate for the next leader of the Conservative Party, I think they have numerous good candidates who may even be preferable to Liberal Mark Carney. Namely, the Premier of Nova Scotia, Tim Houston, the progressive conservative, who is himself in the light of leaders such as Erin O'Toole. Now, I think Tim Houston would make a great leader of the federal Conservatives and may even be preferable to Carney. Alternatives may also include Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, who would be, in my opinion, equivalent to Carney. In other words, a change in leadership is and ought to be required when an electoral loss is experienced. Additionally, we also saw Australia witness a landslide victory for the Labour Party and incumbent Anthony Albanese at the expense of the right-wing coalition headed by Peter Dutton, which was itself attributed to the negative response of the Australian public to Trump's tariffs, which had been praised by the Conservative leader. Hence, we have seen once again that Trump's actions on the world stage are not popular, they are not approved, they're not successful, and they have only served to alienate our allies and, ironically, to alienate Trump's own conservative movement. For the American people's chief business is business, not tomfoolery, and to only erode our credibility on the world stage serves to detriment the American people. Once again, I would like to thank you all for tuning in this week to The Means with Dan Vrabel. I'd like to wish you all a wonderful week, and we shall return next week with the latest in news, the matters of inquiry, and the matters that implicate the American people. Thank you, and have a wonderful evening.